We're talking about the urgent crisis of missing Black women and girls that go largely unreported and dismissed in cities around the country. Recently, my colleague Ebony K. Williams spoke with an advocate in Kansas City who is sounding the alarm on cases that pop up in his town. Take a listen at the roadblocks to reporting your loved one missing.
The reporting process here in Kansas City is difficult. If you don't have a person's full name, date of birth, all this other information, and a lot of time points, people in the streets get to use their nicknames. So, but they're still missing. They still viable people. And for the police department gets to turn you away because you don't know somebody's full name, or you don't, and they just refuse to even but I guarantee you this, if that person was selling drugs, they know their nickname when they're selling drugs.
In 2021, there were more than 250,000 women and girls reported missing in the United States. Of that number, nearly 90,000 of them are Black. This is according to the FBI's National Crime Information Center database. Here's another statistic for you. Although they make up 36% of missing cases, Black women and girls, they're less likely to get media attention. They're also less likely to get police attention. Case in point, the recent missing persons case out of Kansas City, Missouri. For weeks, residents were complaining that Black women were missing and that they were probably being tortured or something violent was happening to them. Those complaints, they went unanswered until a 22-year-old woman managed to escape from her captor after being held in an Excelsior Springs home for nearly a month. That's according to police reports. This man, 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr., kidnapped, raped, and brutally beat the 22-year-old, who also claims that there were other women held with her who didn't make it out of the house. Now, despite clear evidence that something is awry, police are saying that reports of missing women in the area are, quote, unfounded. Unfounded, despite all this information. How does this happen? Joining me now to talk about this case and the alarming number of missing Black women and girls is author and Ohio State University professor, Dr. Treva B. Lindsey. She's the author of a brilliant book. It's called America Goddamn, Violence, Black Women, and the Struggle for Justice. Treva, thank you so much. Welcome to theGrio. What is the latest on the missing Black women and girls in Kansas City?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for covering this story. So the latest, unfortunately, is that there's still so much we don't know about this case. The community is still on edge. There have been at least reports of 2 additional women who were apparently alongside the woman who was at least released or found and able to testify about what happened to her and what happened to others. So there are 2 Black women that we know of that she has mentioned to us, and they've identified her as TJ. They're using that instead of her name. That has identified 2 other women. And the police are still kind of covering themselves, saying that this remains an unfounded allegation, that there's some serial killer or some serial predation that's targeting Black women in the area. But with this woman telling her story, I think we can call a spade and say, in the least, that the police and those involved in the city, the government, need to be paying more attention to what's been happening and these very serious allegations.
Right. So you go to police and say, hey, there's somebody out here doing something that Black girl's missing. And they go, yeah, there's no evidence of that. Now a Black girl escapes the person and says, look, there's more. And they say, yeah, no, still unfounded. Right. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but investigators are still saying that, right? They're saying that there's no evidence that there are other victims, right?
Right. They're saying there's no direct evidence. They looked at a few missing persons reports as of late. They have found one of the Black women that they mentioned in this area that went missing around the same time as the victim that we do know did, and one is still missing. And so even with that one, we're curious and frustrated and angered that this is not kind of sounded the alarm among Kansas City police, Kansas City officials, elected officials, that it's still community organizers, local newspapers, local activists who are really saying you need to do better. And they're still saying there's nothing to be done.
It seems that if a white woman were to be missing, or perhaps if her puppy were missing, there would be a rallying cry from law enforcement and media and citizens. And yet when Black girls are legitimately gone, even if it's just one that we have evidence of or proof of, it's like, what can you do? the racial disparity here to me is obvious. Am I overstating things?
No.
Puppy point notwithstanding.
No, sadly, you're not misstating things. There's an incredible historical record of this kind of erasure and invisibility of missing Black girls and women, that we've moved from 64,000 missing Black girls and women in just a few short years to the statistic you said at the top of the segment of 90,000 being currently missing. We know that in 1979, one of the very important acts that the Combahee River Collective, a very famous Black feminist collective out of the Boston area, one of their major campaigns was amplifying that 11 Black women were killed in a very short period of time in 1979 without any attention from law enforcement until a white woman was killed. And that kind of serial predation went on for a long time without any attention from law enforcement or the criminal legal system, or more recently, even in 2003 in Peoria, Illinois, when there were at least 8 Black women who were killed by a single person.
So there's two pieces here for me. There's the media piece and there's the police piece, among others, but two things I want to focus on. The media piece is the question of why isn't it a compelling narrative? Why isn't it a headline story when Black women and girls and femmes go missing? Because it would seem to me that if media is all about eyeballs and news outlets just love to have a juicy story, in the print they say if it bleeds, it leads. In cable news, we always run in stories about missing people, missing airplanes, wars, trauma, corruption, anything that's a sexy story, right? Why is it that Black missing girls isn't a compelling narrative for media outlets?
Anti-Black racism, sexism, and what Moya Bailey coined as misogynoir. There is a distinct kind of hatred, fear of, erasure of, invisibility of Black women and girls and femmes and non-binary people that our media has been accustomed to. Our media works hand in hand with law enforcement, even in the way that they cover things. And so they're following the trend of law enforcement saying, this is unfounded, and media parrots that back and says this is unfounded, that this is not going to get clicks, that this is not going to garner interest or sympathy or care. We have too few people who care about the lives of Black women and girls.
And then you got the law enforcement side of this, right? Because my personal belief is police love to lock people up. And so it would seem to me that the idea that a Black girl has gone missing and that we may have an idea even of who the perpetrator is, they'd be all over this for the arrest, for the collar, as they call it, right? To get their stats up. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why police would have motivation to put another person in jail in a carceral society. So it seems to be, is law enforcement following the same pattern as the media? What's the reason why a police officer or a detective might say, ain't nothing wrong with that girl, she ain't really missing, or she hasn't been kidnapped, or, we're not going to pursue that lead? What's the reason?
Well, there are a few reasons at work here. One of the things we know with law enforcement when it comes to Black women and girls who go missing is that so often they frame the narrative as runaways, that is the singular way often that law enforcement engage missing Black girls and women. And again, this goes with a lack of care. This comes with racism and sexism and misogynoir as well. But there's a lack of care that embeds into the institution of policing that doesn't see Black women and girls as victims. Rather, they are perpetrators in their own missing. They're the people who are responsible, who are accountable for not being accounted for. And I think that
I'm sorry, is this bound up, and I know we got to run in a second, but is this bound up in these ideas around women being Black girls being hypersexual, untrustworthy, etc.? I mean, because it seems to me a lot of times when the girls go missing, like you said, they say they're runaways, but they're not just runaways. They're assuming these girls are working and doing sex work. They assume these girls are on drugs. They assume these girls are committing some kinds of underground crime. It seems like they create a criminal narrative of Black missing girls so that they can justify not looking for them.
Absolutely. And to be clear, if they were sex workers or living with addiction or were doing something that's considered illicit or criminal, they would still deserve the attention and the care of law enforcement and the media. But there is absolutely a criminalization of Black womanhood and Black girlhood that attends to this, and a long history of tension between the Kansas City Police in this specific instance and the community, where the community has made allegations of sexual violence from police against Black women and girls. So that's also a narrative that is part of this story as well. So this community is responding to decades of being ignored, being hypersexualized and being criminalized, and saying in this moment we need you, and you are saying that we are imagining our own pain and our own terror.
Author and professor Treva Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me.